This is Caring for Kids on News Talk 760 WJR, presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation. And here's your host, President and CEO of the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation, Larry Burns.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caring for Kids. Tonight we have a special show focused on mental health and our efforts at the Foundation to be a catalyst for breaking down the stigma. Joining us tonight will be Scott Kaufman, CEO of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit, Mike Veny, mental health author, writer, and speaker, Shenandoah Chefalo, author of Garbage Bag Suitcase, and faculty at the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. It's all coming up next on Caring for Kids, here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
It's Caring for Kids with Larry Burns.
Scott Kaufman is the Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit, the primary philanthropic and volunteer organization for the Metro Detroit Jewish community. Appointed in July of 2009, Mr. Kaufman is responsible for leading the organization in its mission to take care of the needs of the Jewish community and build a vibrant Jewish future in Detroit, Israel, and around the world. Scott is widely regarded as one of the foremost innovators and community builders in the Jewish communal world. Under his leadership, the Detroit Federation has seen steady growth in terms of its annual campaign dollars, directed gifts, endowments, grants, donor-based gifts, young adult engagement, and overall participation in the Jewish communal activities. Prior to joining the Federation in 2007, Scott was a real estate developer. He is also a founding partner of the Joe Dumars Fieldhouse, a sports facility in Sterling Heights. He earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan in 1989, and in addition to his work, he is a dedicated skier, cyclist, and aspiring boxer. So I am not going to get you riled up, because you might just take me out. So welcome to Caring for Kids, Scott.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Yep, always nice to see you, and we've been partnering for a while now, so I thought it was time to tell our listeners about that. So I gave in your bio a brief overview of the Federation, but for our listeners who aren't quite familiar, tell us about the Jewish Federation.
So the Jewish Federation is existed in one form or another for 100 years here in Metro Detroit. And its historic mission was to take care of the needs of the community, basically in the help business. In recent years, we sort of added a second mission, which is really more around engagement, community building. So there's the help side, and then there's what I call the fun side.
Mm-hmm. And so I know you do a lot with children and young adults, and so talk about that, and then we're going to get into specifically mental health. So, but overall, what are the activities for young kids and then maybe young adults?
So we fund about 17 local organizations,
right,
many of whom are focused on youth. Schools, summer camps, youth groups, programming, lots of activities for young families and children. Everything from toddlers getting monthly books in the mail to trips, Western camping trips to Israel for teens, and a variety of programs in between. We also fund a lot of social service organizations, most of whom serve the entire community, not just the Jewish community, but in areas of mental health, special needs, access. Those are all focused on kids as well.
Yes. And so you mentioned, and we're talking with Scott Kaufman, who's the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. And as you know, and since I've been involved with our foundation, I'm using the Jewish Federation as something we aspire to be like. You mentioned that you fund about 17 organizations. We now, as you well know, are on a path as a community foundation for children and families. And so I've always admired the Federation, and now that I'm in the position I'm in, I can take that admiration and try to as we sort of evolve to be more a community-based organization like the Jewish Federation. So that's something that we're working on.
Well, one, I'm very flattered, but two, your focus on kids, the return on investment, I don't mean the dollar return,
Right.
but the impact return is enormous because the interventions early in life, the ability to make a real long-term difference is significant. The data shows that, and it's really great that you focused around that in our community because it's just going to make our region that much stronger.
Absolutely. And as you know, we've expanded what we view as children from some prenatal education to first-time moms through college. So we're certainly into that young adult world as you are as well. And so I know that the Federation has a commitment to a lot of things, but one of those is the current commitment that you have in mental health, particularly for the youngsters in the Jewish community. Can you tell us about that and how you sort of evolved into that?
Sure. A few years ago, we did a community-wide survey on social services, and one of the areas that was very clear from the results, there were about 1,000 teenagers who were part of the survey group, and they were self-reporting very high levels of depression and anxiety and some bullying, either for themselves or people they knew. And the numbers were pretty high. And my initial reaction was, well, we're not an expert in that. We have a lot of organizations that we fund. One of the heads of one of the organizations said, yeah, but you're an expert in convening the community, and that's what we need because this is too big a problem for any one organization or even a bunch of organizations to deal with if they're not working together. So we really looked at a collective impact approach. We then spent about 6 months with a variety of experts, so psychiatrists, academics from the University of Michigan and Stanford, youth group people, school advisors, just a variety of people who deal with young people and know the mental health field to look at what we could do, what's the intervention, and we came up with sort of a three-pronged strategy. First being we have to change the narrative and reduce the stigma. People have to be comfortable talking about it. Second was a very robust training module, so all people who either in their professional or volunteer life are interacting with teens need a certain level of training. They're not going to become doctors, but to be able to recognize signs of problems.
Absolutely.
And then third, the back-end resources. How are they aligned when we have a big gathering of teens at a youth group conference, 600 kids? Are there social workers there on site so the other workers can focus on their running the conference and little things like that? But the reception's been amazing, and having you and Children's Hospital Foundation as a partner really helped us launch this.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about what that partnership is.
Sure. It was interesting because this is not a uniquely Jewish problem. This is a problem that if you really look at the data, the uptick starts basically when the iPhone was invented. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, if I was left out of something, often I didn't even know about it.
Right.
Now, on Instagram, you're getting bombarded with messages, and whatever the thing is you're not invited to looks like the greatest thing in the history of the world because nobody puts the boring stuff on Instagram.
Right.
So if you're an insecure 12-year-old, or maybe even a secure 12-year-old, that's much more traumatic. Social media, the ability to, the bullying and all, cyberbullying is a real thing. So this problem, I think, is worse than it was before. It's also much easier for kids to be isolated, sort of sit on their phone and not really interact and just sort of live in the virtual space, which isn't healthy either. So, when we saw that, we thought, okay, we're a small enough contained community that we could try some things. And if they work, they could go to scale, meaning to other communities in our region, around the country. And that's where Children's Hospital Foundation came in. They saw that we were doing something interesting and maybe a little ahead of the curve. And one of the key components to reducing the stigma was we wanted to do a series of videos where actual kids from the community that other people know, actual teachers and doctors, would talk about things. And many of the kids dealt with serious problems and got out the other side and talked about the importance of having someone to speak to. But we wanted to do it at a pretty high level, and that was the area of partnership where you guys came in and basically funded this ability to make a series of videos. And even before our website, even before we really launched the program, the first video we put online sort of as a soft test, and in 3 days there were 50,000 hits.
50,000.
So it went viral. People in these videos were getting calls from, one woman she told me it was somebody she knew barely in high school. Called her about a problem her daughter had that was the same. It was an eating disorder issue. Freshmen in high school were going up to the seniors who were in the videos. And instead of a stigma, they were almost heroic. Can you talk to me? I want to talk to you about whatever the problem was. So real quickly, we saw, okay, there's something here. This is a way to kind of change the narrative, reduce the stigma. And you're starting to see it throughout society. You're having professional athletes who, even 2-3 years ago, would have been very unlikely to go on TV and talk about their mental health issues. Right. Now they're doing it, about depression and anxiety. And so it's really important that conversation gets out there. For kids and parents, they would often not talk because the parents felt like, well, they were failing or did something wrong. And if you had a broken arm, you talk to somebody, or if you needed your knee surgery. So that's the direction. And you guys really were the first ones in to recognize this, along with some other foundations in the area. But we were really blessed to have you on board.
Well, we were delighted, and I can tell you the videos are outstanding. They're poignant. Some of them are emotional, but they're most importantly effective. So we hope this partnership continues for a long time. So, Scott Kaufman, keep up the great work at the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit, and look forward to being your partner for a long time.
Great. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome. Coming up next, we're going to hear from Mike Veny. Mike is a mental health author. He's a writer and a speaker. And that's when Caring for Kids continues here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
Welcome back to Caring for Kids on WJR, presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation.
Mike Veny is a member of the National Speakers Association, having delivered hundreds of keynote presentations and corporate events. He is the author of the book, Transforming Stigma, How to Become a Mental Wellness Superhero. He's founder and CEO of Mike Veny, Inc., which is dedicated to helping people heal emotional pain and discover meaning through simple ideas that empower wellness and health relationships. Mike is a keynote speaker at our Children's Hospital Michigan Foundation Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health Summit on May 14th at the Inn at St. John's in Plymouth, Michigan. Mike Veny, welcome to Caring for Kids.
Thank you for having me, Larry, and hello to your listeners.
Great. And we have a lot of listeners. WJR reaches a good part of the country. It's 50,000 watt power, so we have a lot of folks listening to us. And so, Mike Veny, tell us about your personal journey, and I know our listeners will find that extremely interesting.
My personal journey, well, this year I'm about to turn 40, and when I was a kid, particularly starting at age 6, I really started to struggle with behavior, and I would have lots of outbursts and just appeared to be a child that was just out of control. And I came from a wonderful home, but my parents tried to get me help through therapy, and even though they tried, things got worse. And basically throughout my youth, I ended up being expelled from 3 schools for behavior problems.
Okay.
Hospitalized in a mental hospital 3 times. I attempted to die by suicide at age 10, and I self-harmed.
At age 10?
Age 10.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's so much I can say about that, because suicide with young people is such a big challenge right now. So, but back to my story.
Yes.
The thing that turned my life around was drumming. Despite all the medications they put me on and all the different therapists, drumming was the thing that just really turned me around and gave me something to ground myself and actually express myself in an emotionally healthy way. And so that's basically my story. And nowadays, I still struggle with mental health challenges. I struggle with depression, anxiety, and OCD. But I'm doing much better, and I know how to cope, and I'm able to live in the world and have a life and have friends, and everything is okay.
Yeah, that's a great story. And we're talking with Mike Veny, who's going to be our keynote speaker at our mental and Behavioral Health Summit on May 14th. And so I mentioned, Mike, that your book, which is titled Transforming Stigma, How to Become a Mental Wellness Superhero. Tell us about the book, and I know that our listeners out there, once they hear about it, they might want to get a hold of it. So tell us about the book.
Okay, so about my book, I don't usually get this question, so this is a good one here. First of all, I didn't want to write a book, but everyone told me you should write a book. They tell people that, right?
Yes, and you actually did it.
And I actually did it. And one of the things that I made it a point to do is when we talk about the subject of mental health in general, a lot of times, not to insult anyone, it's just a boring conversation. If I go to a mental health seminar, again, it sometimes feels boring. So I wanted to write something that would keep people's attention, that would be exciting, have some laughs. And in this book, I talk about becoming a superhero. I compared everything to superheroes in the comics. And one of the things that I share in the book is my story, so you get to hear my story in great detail, and what I was feeling. And it's very good for the parents who are listening who might have a child who's struggling, because parents often don't understand what their child is going through if they have a child who's struggling. And so this book will give you a lens into maybe what your child might be struggling with, or just different ways of thinking about what they might be going through. And the second half of the book is dedicated to actual solutions to truly transforming the stigma surrounding mental health. Because, truth be told, it shouldn't be a special conversation that we have an event for. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm excited about the event,
right.
But like the common cold, we don't have like the common cold speaker come into the common cold symposium.
No, and that's part of breaking down the stigma, right?
Yep.
So, good. So I know you were recently in China and Great Britain, and is there anything that you learned there and what other countries are doing to approach this situation, this wellness, this mental health dilemma?
Well, it's actually been very validating because one of the things that is on my mind is the word culture a lot. And even here in the United States, I mean, you go to different parts of this country, and there's just different cultural aspects to different parts of the country.
Absolutely.
And it affects how we talk about mental health. In fact, it affects how we interact with each other. And one thing I always remind myself is that human beings are tribal people by nature. Even if you're listening to this interview and you're thinking, I'm one of those people that doesn't like people and I like to be alone, we're still tribal people by nature. Right. And we all want to be part of the group. And with that, we figure out what the norms are in the group, and we do our best to try to fit with that so we can fit in. We don't realize it, but even those of us who are trying to be unique. And so one of the things that I'm learning is, like in China, it's not something that's really talked about, and certain groups in China feel like mental illness is like a demon that you have. And, so that's a whole nother issue with discussing it when people not getting the help that they need.
Yeah, so that's very fascinating, and I think we can learn from other cultures, as you mentioned. And so I know that there's parents and grandparents and others listening to this, and I wanted to ask you if you could highlight for our listeners maybe 3-4 things that are key elements of what we can all do regarding our own mental wellness to maybe someday be a superhero.
To someday be a superhero. Yeah. Well, one of the things that every single person listening, and I'm going to challenge all of your listeners to do this, is to start doing one new activity starting tomorrow to take care of yourself. And there's a difference between self-care activities and escape activities. Escape activities can be Netflix or watching the game, video games, stuff like that. But self-care activities are intentional activities that you do to grow and nurture yourself. And if you're going to say that you don't have time, that's a problem. You need to stop saying that. Everyone can make time, especially parents. And the reason I encourage people to practice self-care, especially parents, is it helps children model self-care. Yes. Pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is just start having the conversation about mental health, even if it feels uncomfortable. And if you're sharing about yourself, you don't need to share every little bit of information. You can just say to someone, even at work, I'm going through a rough time. Everyone knows what that means.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't need to go into detail. And number three, look for opportunities to check in with people in your life and just say, how are you? And really listen to what they're saying.
Right. So really wait for an answer versus how was your weekend? It's
Yeah.
But really, how are you versus just superficial conversation.
Yes, and I want to add actually two other things in there really
good.
quickly. Is one of the questions I get often is what do you say to someone who's struggling? And you can go online and there's so much information about what to say to someone who's struggling. First of all, if you have someone in your life who's struggling, my heart goes out to you because it's not easy on anyone. And when someone's struggling, the worst thing you can do is sometimes try to give them advice or tell them to cheer up. In fact, if you do that to me, you're probably going to make me angry. So two things you can say to someone who's struggling. One is the question, how can I support you? And when you ask that question, be sure to be quiet after that and let the person answer.
Okay.
And the other thing you can say to them is, help me understand. And again, be quiet and let them answer. And what you do is you give that person space to start to feel comfortable around you, even if they're not going to be clear and articulate, to share what's on their mind.
Great advice. And so I'm looking forward to meeting you in person on May 14th at our summit. And give us a little bit of a clue of what you'll be talking about at the summit when you're speaking as a keynote.
Sure. Well, I'm going to be going into a lot of detail about my story because I feel it relates to a lot of the youth who are struggling, especially getting to hear about what goes through someone's mind when they self-harm, when they want to die by suicide. A lot of people don't understand, why would someone want to do that? And I'm going to give some insight into what went on in my mind and what we can do to prevent it. The other thing we're going to be talking about is self-care in great detail, what that really means, how to have the conversation, how to have the uncomfortable conversation, and better ways to connect with each other so we can help each other. So there's going to be a lot of information packed into this little event, and if I have just a little bit of time, I'm going to speak real fast because I'm from New York State, but I promise it's going to be great, and I really encourage people to come out.
Absolutely. It's going to be wonderful. And you probably haven't been to the Inn at St. John's. It's a former seminary.
Oh, wow.
And it's a great location. It's not only beautiful in the spring, it has a golf course, but the rooms are very, very nice. And so I think that you'll find it a good place to give your comments. And most of all, we're looking forward to hearing about your story, your advice in person, and make it a great day. So, Mike Veny, thank you for being on Caring for Kids, and most importantly, thank you for what you do each and every day. This behavioral mental health focus of our foundation is critical. We're not only funding programs that help in this regard, but we're also advocating and trying to break down the stigma like you do.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing. I'm super excited to meet all of you, and to the listeners out there, please come out. I'd love to meet you.
Thanks a lot. Mike Veny, mental health author. He's a writer and a speaker. And coming up next, we're going to hear from Shenandoah Chefalo. She's an author of Garbage Bag Suitcase and faculty member at the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. That's when Caring for Kids continues here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
Welcome back to Caring for Kids on WJR. Presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation. Once again, here's Larry Burns.
We have Shenandoah Chefalo on the line, and plagued and embarrassed by her name, Shenandoah Chefalo developed a tough skin at an early age. Along the way, she learned to deal with disappointment, how to push through discomfort, overcome adversity, and accurately gauge people, qualities that have certainly helped her to succeed. After spending nearly 20 years as a law office administrator, Shenandoah became unsettled by the ever-revolving door of the criminal justice system and set out to find a way to change it. Shenandoah Chefalo is a graduate of Michigan State University, go Green, a core essential graduate from Coach U, and faculty at the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. Shenandoah is also a keynote speaker at our first annual Child and Adolescent Behavioral Summit on May 14th at the Inn at St. John's. So, Shenandoah, welcome to Caring for Kids.
Thanks for having me on today, Larry.
Delighted, and I know we find you, at least I think we find you, in northern Michigan.
It It is still a snowy winter in northern Michigan.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure it's very pretty, though. And so our efforts in behavioral health, mental health are now a major focus area of our foundation, and it's also a statewide effort. So we hope to be more engaged in your neck of the woods in the near future. So I just wanted you to know that.
Well, we always welcome people to northern Michigan.
Great. It's beautiful. So tell our listeners about your early childhood and how these experiences shaped your future. And I know they're very interested in hearing that story.
Yeah, well, briefly, I mean, we could dive into numerous aspects of my childhood. But what I would say briefly is that I had, I think, best stated as a nomadic childhood. Although I was born in San Diego, California, I moved over 50 times before entering the foster care system.
50 times?
Yeah,
50.
Attending over 35 schools throughout the country. So, I think that's best summarized by a nomadic childhood.
Yes, right.
And in that time, we were homeless, often seen as motel families or living out of our cars, or squatting in various friends' houses and couch surfing, things like that, plagued by family members who suffered from severe addictions and mental health issues that were, of course, their mental health issues complicated by addiction and vice versa. And then finally, right before I turned 13, the summer before I turned 13, I self-reported myself to foster care. At that time, we had made our way across the country from California back to Michigan, where my biological mother is from. And then I found myself in foster care shortly thereafter, and then eventually aged out of foster care at the age of 18. The delightful midnight bell rings, and there you find yourself. So, aged out of foster care, I was lucky enough to have a teacher who took some interest in me in high school because I aged out halfway through my senior year of high school, and was really just trying to figure out a way to stay in high school. With the help of a teacher, I ended up applying for college and getting into Michigan State, her alma mater.
Wow.
Go green,
yes.
right?
Yep, go green. Go green.
And, I think that was supposed to be the happily ever after, right? Like, yes, you've suffered this trauma and this turmoil, but we got you into college, and now you're 18, an adult, and good luck to you. And that really became a difficult transition for me. I would not say I was an exceptional student. My first year at MSU, I was dealing with quite a bit of things, attempted suicide for the first time, was really depressed and withdrawn from everything that was happening around me. And playing into that was financial need. I didn't have enough money for basic things that I needed in college, hygiene products, etc., and so had to get a job and ended up getting hired part-time as a receptionist in a law office at minimum wage, and enjoyed that job. Maybe not the firm I started with, but I enjoyed the work and eventually sort of worked my way up into being a law office administrator. Hired a law clerk who eventually became my husband, and we moved to Traverse City in '99 to start a law office, really with this idea of trying to do it differently than we had seen criminal law being done. And we did criminal law practice in Traverse City. My husband's still a practicing criminal defense attorney. And in that process, I started to realize that our clients' issues weren't merely whatever the crime that brought them to us was. And it got revealed that a lot of our clients had spent time in foster care, had these tumultuous backgrounds in childhood. And at that time, I really hadn't disclosed my time in the foster care system. It wasn't something that I openly talked about. Very few people knew about it. And I just sort of started Googling, foster care statistics, trying to understand what was going on with our clients, and really became floored by the statistic that approximately 70% of incarcerated inmates had spent time in the child welfare system at some point in their childhood. And that really got me thinking sort of about root cause and those things. And so I made it my mission to sort of let out this secret that I had. I wrote the book Garbage Bag Suitcase with the hope that we could really reinvent child welfare and get to some root cause issues and look at how do we heal trauma in order to help people make better decisions.
Great. And so we're talking with Shenandoah Chefalo, as she mentioned, the author of Garbage Bag Suitcase. And I have that book in my hand, which I find fascinating. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about the book, that if they read that or if they start skimming it, what are some of the things you in particular want them to make sure they find? You know, one of the things I found fascinating when I was reading through it was your observation of making some decisions about people based on their groceries in the grocery store. And I just found all of these things so fascinating. And I know that with our limited time, you can't talk too much about the book, but maybe there's a couple things you want to make sure people know about it, and it might get them to go online and buy it.
Yeah, well, with regards to the grocery cart, all of these things, all of the stories that I try to tell in the book really are to get people interested in understanding one basic thing, and that is, why do people do the things they do?
Right.
Whether we see somebody in a store who seems to be yelling and screaming for what we would say is no reason, or, you know, we see a news article about someone, you know, maybe a mom who got caught drunk driving with her children in the car, and we see the comments, or we make comments to ourselves about why would somebody do that. Really, for me, it's about having a different conversation, which is what's happened to that person to bring them to this point, and understanding that most all of us have a story to tell, and that story affects the way in which we see the entire world. And especially for people who have lived through severe trauma or severe adversity, sometimes we see the world in what might be considered a chaotic way, in which we're always looking to protect ourselves from the next thing. And so all of these stories that I share in the book are really trying to get us to that point and to say, and what do we do about it? And for me, the purpose of sharing my story, because I'd done a good job at keeping it a secret for a really long time,
right.
But the purpose for me to share the story was to get people past the story and almost to the second half of the book, where we can talk about solutions in which we can address this in our communities.
Yeah, it's a great read, so I highly recommend it. And so one of the things we're now at the foundation very involved in our behavioral and mental health focus area are, and I think you alluded to what we are calling the social determinants of health, and why people are the way they are. And so I know this topic is also about root cause of sort of the same thing in these social determinants of health. And another new term that I hear all the time is resiliency. In fact,
right.
I read an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple days ago regarding the Generation Z and their lack of resiliency as it relates to almost everything they do. And so I know you're a faculty at the Center for the Trauma Resilient Communities. And can you talk a little bit about the center and this resiliency factor?
Yeah, so the center started because a bunch of people who were really involved in trauma-informed implementation theory were interested in realizing that reaches beyond the walls of foster care or child welfare, and that really you need whole communities who, yes, understand the trauma piece, but more importantly, because the trauma piece can be really depressing to talk about and you can get stuck in that circle for a long time, is so what do we do about it? Why is it that some people, like myself, go against all statistics and all odds and seem to have great resiliency or great bounce back, and other people don't? And so looking at things like the Harvard study on resilience and those pieces, helping communities understand how they play together, and that there are some pretty core things we can do to help people retrain their brain, if you will, so that they can bounce back better, right? And,
yes, exactly.
And a lot of those things are based in connections and communities, and that's why they're so important.
Yeah,
so the center is focused on training and helping communities develop models that work in their specific groups.
Sounds terrific. And so we're delighted that you have agreed to be one of our keynote speakers on May 14th at the Child and Adolescent Behavioral Summit. It's at the Inn at St. John's in Plymouth, Michigan. And so what will be your general message there so we can entice people listening to this interview to come out on May 14th?
The general mission for me is going to be real simple. Let's focus on solutions and how we move this conversation forward, and what action steps can every single person take to do that, because I believe there's something for everybody to do in this conversation.
Great. So I'm looking forward to meeting you now in person on May 14th. And I know you're going to do a great job, and we'll have your book available. And so appreciate it very much, Shenandoah.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Larry.
All right. Safe travels. That was Shenandoah Chefalo. She's author of Garbage Bag Suitcase and faculty at the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities and a keynote speaker at our May 14th summit. And coming up next, I'll introduce you to this month's Northwestern Mutual Little Champion and provide an update on some foundation news here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR. This portion of Caring for Kids is dedicated to highlighting a Little Champion. Little Champion program is sponsored by Northwestern Mutual. The program honors children who have overcome major obstacles in their young lives and continue to tackle those challenges with a smile each and every day. This month's Little Champion is 14-year-old Maya from Canton, Michigan. Though Maya was born with a heart defect, she doesn't let that stop her from spreading her positivity and joy to all she comes in contact with. Maya's contagious smile and fun-loving personality is a testament to all of us that a Little Champion can't be beat. Congratulations, Maya, this month's Little Champion. For more information on the Little Champion program and how to nominate a child, visit chmfoundation.org/champion. We have some updates coming up with the foundation. The third annual Derby for Kids is May 4th. The third annual Derby for Kids is May 4th, 2019. It's Derby Day at the Country Club of Detroit. Tickets are now available on our website, so hopefully people can make it out there. It's a great venue, great cause for pediatric brain cancer research. And then we have our first annual Mental Health Summit on May 14th at the Inn at St. John's. Again, tickets are available on our website as well. Well, thank you for joining us tonight on Caring for Kids. The Foundation is proud to sponsor this program, and we hope to see you next month, indeed.
Caring for Kids on WJR has been presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation.